The last warning of Sol, the broadcast, did not begin with a declaration of war. It did not feature a decorated admiral standing before a glittering stellar fleet, nor did it contain desperate pleas for diplomatic intervention from the Galactic Assembly. It began with a single, uncompressed high-frequency audio tone that cut through every commercial, military, and civilian subspace relay across 2,000 light-years. On the bridge of the Devourer's Crown, the flagship of the Valrakian hegemony's vanguard fleet, Fleet Master Torak sneered at the tactical display. Just 6 hours prior, his dreadnoughts had incinerated the human research outpost on the icy moon of Caelus Roman IV. The humans had offered no orbital defense, no shielded bastions, and no heavy war platforms. They were a fragile, quiet species that occupied the desolate fringes of the Orion Spur, known only for their modest trade frigates and simple scientific enclaves. Or so the galaxy had been led to believe. "Is this their surrender?" Torak grunted, his heavy jaw clicking as he gestured to his communications officer. "Play the signal. Let us hear how the soft skins beg when their flesh begins to burn." The audio tone cut out, replaced by the calm, unhurried voice of a human female. She spoke not in panic, but with the cold, methodical clarity of an air traffic controller reading a routine flight plan. "To the command deck of the Valrakian Vanguard Fleet, this is the Sol System Defense Command. At 0400 hours Universal Time, your forces initiated unprovoked hostile action against Scientific Station Alpha 9, resulting in total hull breach and the loss of 42 civilian researchers." Torak chuckled, a low, guttural sound. 42, they send a sector-wide ping over 42 corpses. "For 3 centuries, the voice continued, smooth and unyielding, under the provisions of the Outer Rim Non-Proliferation Treaty, humanity has maintained a strict 20% ceiling on visible orbital tonnage. We agreed to paint our hulls white. We agreed to limit our plasma yields. We agreed to pretend that we were a peaceful species that had outgrown its violent past." The holographic star map in the center of the Valrakian bridge flickered. The familiar green icons representing the barren, empty star systems surrounding Sol began to shift color. "The treaty was not designed to limit our aggression," the voice said quietly. "It was designed to give us an excuse not to build what we are capable of building. You have broken the treaty. Therefore, the administrative protocol known as the Long Peace is terminated." "Commander," the Valrakian sensor operator gasped, his scales flushing a sickly yellow. "Massive electromagnetic spikes registered across the entire Sol sector. No, not just Sol, systems UAT-1 through UAT-7. On the tactical map, the empty space surrounding the human home system did not just light up. It dissolved into a dense, terrifying grid of amber contacts. Deactivating stealth shrouds on primary defense arrays, the human voice announced over the speakers. The barren asteroid belts of the Sol system, long recorded in Imperial archives as worthless piles of gravel and nickel iron, began to split open on the sensors. Entire planetoids, hollowed out over generations, shed their rocky skins to reveal 5-kilometer-wide kinetic rail arrays. Deep space communication relays morphed into heavy pulse laser batteries. "Sensors report 60,000 capital-class signatures," the operator choked out, his voice cracking. "They aren't ships, Fleet Master. The entire asteroid belt is an integrated weapons grid." Torak stood frozen, his eyes wide as the numbers on the display cascaded into astronomical figures. "Recall the Vanguard, raise all shields to maximum, prepare hyperspatial jump engines." "You believed we were weak because we built schools instead of dreadnoughts." The human voice spoke one final time, her tone dropping into a grim, absolute promise. "You forgot that the only reason a predator builds a school is because it has already killed everything else in the forest. You have 20 minutes to clear human space. After that, we clean the perimeter. The transmission cut out, leaving only the deafening, mechanical hum of the Valrakian hyperdrives struggling to charge against an artificial gravitational interdiction field that had just slammed shut over the entire sector like a steel vault. In the dark vacuum beyond, the true face of Sol opened its eyes. The interdiction field didn't just disrupt hyperdrives. It locked the geometry of spacetime within a 30-light-year radius into a rigid, unyielding cage. On the bridge of the Devourer's crown, warning klaxons blared in a deafening, irregular cadence as primary navigation systems collapsed under the weight of localized graviton spikes. Fleet Master Torak slammed his fist onto the command console, the display shattering beneath his claws. Purge the drive coils, force a raw jump through the gravity well. We can't, Fleet Master, the chief engineer screamed over the sirens. The spatial density has been artificially increased by 400%. If we engage the warp drive now, the ship will shear itself into atomic dust before we cross the bow wave. Outside the viewport, the void was no longer empty. The asteroid belt surrounding the inner Sol system was unfolding like a clockwork nightmare. Massive, 3-kilometer-long plates of iron and basalt sloughed away from dormant asteroids, tumbling into the dark to reveal the gleaming, dark matter-coated hulls of buried defense platforms. Sol was not a solar system. It was a fortress world whose moat spanned tens of billions of kilometers. Fleet Master, the sensor operator shrieked, collapsing backward from his station as his console overloaded in a shower of white sparks. Multiple slip-space ruptures detected inside our immediate defensive perimeter. They're not jumping from the outer edge, they were already here. Space ripped open 3,000 kilometers off the starboard bow of the Valrakian fleet. Out stepped 3 human dreadnoughts. They possessed none of the elegant, sweeping curves of the Valrakian war galleys, nor the diplomatic white paint of the human trade vessels. They were brutal, angular blocks of matte black carbon composite, bristling with primary battery turrets the size of small cities. On their hulls, illuminated by the cold glare of tactical spotlights, ran a single designation prefix, Unsk Vanguard. On the central communications monitor, the image of the human female returned. She wore a dark, unadorned naval uniform, her eyes cold and completely unreadable. "This is Admiral Chen of the Sol Defense Command," she said smoothly. "Your 20 minutes have expired." "Wait," Torak bellowed, his voice laced with a raw, desperate panic he had never known in his 2 centuries of command. "We acknowledge our violation. We will pay reparations for the research station. We will retreat beyond the Orion Spur." "Reparations were for the era of treaties, Fleet Master," Chen interrupted softly. "You brought a war fleet to a house of science. We are simply returning the courtesy." The screen went black. The dark matter dreadnoughts didn't fire plasma or energy beams. They launched point defense kinetic sweeps, relentless curtains of tungsten carbide shot accelerated to 8% of light speed by linear magnetic rails. The Valrakian Vanguard, a fleet that had subjugated 30 star systems and reduced entire worlds to ash, was dismantled in 90 seconds. Energy shields didn't fail. They shattered instantaneously under the kinetic load, the physical impact crumpling reinforced hulls like light foil. The Devourer's crown spun out of control as its starboard propulsion array was sheared away in a blinding flash of secondary explosions. Torak lay on the sloped deck of his dying bridge, smoke filling his lungs, watching through the cracked viewport as the black dreadnoughts moved past his burning fleet without slowing down. They weren't even focusing on his flagship anymore. They were aligning their primary batteries toward the deep space lanes leading back to the Valrakian home territory. A single data burst slipped through the dying ship's comms. an automated wideband broadcast from Sol Defense Command sent to every galactic capital, containing live telemetry of the Valrakian fleet's total destruction, accompanied by a single, permanent message. The long peace has ended. Do not cross the Uat. The broadcasted telemetry hit the Galactic Assembly like a kinetic strike. Within minutes, the live feed of the Valrakian Vanguard fleet being atomized was playing on repeat in every high command chamber, trade guild, and sovereign senate across 2,000 light-years. The Valrakian hegemony, a warlike power that had terrorized the Outer Rim for 3 centuries, had been stripped of its pride and its flagship in less than 2 minutes by a species everyone thought spent its time writing poetry and measuring ice cores. In the grand rotunda of the assembly, the Valrakian ambassador stood trembling, his scales turned a sickly, mottled gray. Surrounding delegates from 50 star systems backed away from him, leaving a wide, quiet space around his desk, as if the radiation from Sol might bleed through the holostation. On the central projection floor, the message from Sol Defense Command remained fixed in bold, luminous human script. The long peace has ended. Do not cross the Uat. 3 hours after the destruction of the Vanguard, a solitary human vessel dropped out of sublight at the edge of the Valrakian home system. It was not a dreadnought. It was a single, sleek courier drone, painted in non-reflective black, broadcasting a direct transmission to the Valrakian High Council. The transmission contained no demands for land. It contained no diplomatic terms, no request for tribute, and no offer for a ceasefire treaty. It was a simple, automated ledger. Itemized down to the milligram was the exact cost of the destroyed scientific station on Kalis Roman 4, 42 human lives, 3 scientific arrays, and 8,000 tons of refined equipment. Below it was a single calculation, rendered in cold, red mathematical symbols. Debt clearance required. Surrender of all Valrakian military orbital yards within 48 hours, or Sol Defense Command will collect the balance in atmospheric displacement. The Valrakian High Council did not debate. They did not call upon their allies. By nightfall, the order was given, and the proudest military-industrial shipyards in the sector were powered down, their crews evacuated, and their keys handed over to automated human tugs that dragged them back into the deep shadow of the Uat cloud. Across the rest of the galaxy, star maps were quietly redrawn. The human systems were no longer shaded in the soft, welcoming blue of open territories. They were recolored in a deep, stark charcoal, marked with a single, permanent naval warning symbol that every captain from the core to the rim memorized before taking the helm. Here lie the Deathwielders. They built the peace, and they built the cage. Pray they never decide to open the door. The annexation of the Valrakian shipyards was not celebrated on Earth. There were no victory parades in Geneva, no triumphant broadcasts across the civilian channels, and no national holidays declared. The human public simply went back to work, living their lives under the warm light of a sun that was now surrounded by 40,000 tons of quiet, imported alien steel. In the Outer Rim, however, the silence was deafening. The Galactic Assembly, once a loud and boisterous arena where empires traded threats and carved up border systems like raw meat, had become unnervingly polite. When human envoys arrived for routine trade negotiations, delegates from older, grander species practically tripped over themselves to yield the floor. Imperial fleets gave Sol-registered freight vessels a 5 light-year clearance zone, treating simple grain haulers with the frantic deference usually reserved for unstable antimatter transports. 6 months after the incident at Kalis Roman 4, Admiral Chen sat in the quiet observation lounge of High Command, suspended 6,000 kilometers above Earth's North Pole. Beside her stood High Ambassador Vale, an elder representative of the Centauri Concordat, one of the few species who had maintained friendly, albeit distant, ties with humanity during the era of the Long Peace. Vale looked out through the reinforced viewport at the sweeping curve of Earth below. To the naked eye, the planet looked serene, wrapped in swirling white clouds and deep blue oceans. But on Vale's tactical lens, the sky above Earth was a shimmering, multi-layered mesh of energy fields and heavy defense nodes, so thick it obscured the stars. "You built an iron cage around yourselves," Vale said softly, his voice full of a sad, lingering awe. "For 300 years, we thought you were soft. We thought you were fragile because you hid behind treaties and allowed us to dictate the rules of the Galactic table." "We weren't hiding behind treaties, Ambassador," Chen replied, sipping her bitter black coffee. "We were using them as a damper." Vale turned to look at her, his brows furrowing. "A damper." "Humanity spent 2,000 years killing itself over soil, flags, and pride before we ever cracked the atomic code," Chen said, her gaze remaining fixed on the stars. "When we finally made it to space, we realized something terrifying. We realized that if we brought our natural instincts out into the void, we would burn the galaxy down in an afternoon. So we wrote the Long Peace. We agreed to limit ourselves, to play quiet, and to build schools instead of war barges." She set her cup down on the glass railing with a small, sharp click. "The treaty wasn't to protect us from you, Vale. It was to protect us from us. We needed a rulebook to keep our own hands off the trigger." Vale swallowed hard, his skin paling slightly as the true scale of the horror settled over him. The galaxy hadn't almost conquered a weak species. It had accidentally kicked the lock off a cage containing a monster that had spent 3 centuries trying very hard to remain civilized. "And now," Vale asked quietly, "now that the damper is gone?" Admiral Chen turned to him, her expression calm, measured, and entirely unreadable. "Now we stay behind our fence," she said. "We don't want your world's ambassador, we don't want your tribute, and we don't want your crown, we just want to be left alone in the dark." She gestured out toward the vast, empty void beyond the Uit cloud, where the silent black silhouettes of the Vanguard fleet drifted in their eternal, watchful patrols. "Tell your assembly to keep their ships on their side of the line," Chen added softly, "because if we have to come out again, we won't bother writing a second treaty. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest uploads.